All free episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. And to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today. And we thank you in advance.
Good. Okay, so I'll get started so we can finish in a timely fashion. So I take it that the weather is affecting our attendance tonight, because obviously it's not the subject, since everybody's should be interested in battle babies. Well, my name is Tim Smith, in case somebody doesn't know me. And the program I'm going to do tonight is something that I have been collecting information on for years, but I never have put this together in any sort of program before. With all the details surrounding the battle and the soldiers that fought in the battle, it's sometimes easy to forget that the town was occupied by families during the 3 days of fighting. The battle erupted very suddenly on July 1st, and there was very little time to make arrangements to flee the area. And while some families did evacuate the town, the greater majority sought the safety of their cellars during the fighting. And, I think that's something that every visitor can appreciate. They can relate to. The fear of the safety of one's family, not just for yourself, but for your loved ones, especially your children. And what would it be like for the women in the town who had small children or who were pregnant at the time? It should come as no surprise that the town the size of Gettysburg would have women that were pregnant and were about to give birth at the time of the battle. And, imagine how stressful that would have been. I just did some facts and figures, some I did recently, and I took the 1870 census, and I looked at 8 different age ranges. I looked to see how many people were 11 years old, how many were 10 years old, how many were 9, how many were 8, 7, 6, and 5, and 4. I didn't do any younger than 4 in the 1870 census because there was a boom after the Civil War, obviously, like after any war with soldiers returning, where you're going to have more children born. But I took those years, added them up, and divided them. And I came up with about 60 children per year were born in the town of Gettysburg. Now, of course, there is infant mortality. And we have some pretty good statistics about infant mortality that have been done in studies in the United States. And in 1860, the infant mortality rate was 18%. So if we add that to the number of children who survived per year in the town, about 70 children are born in the town over an 8-year period each year around the time of the battle. Today, if you want to compare that, I think the mortality rate in the United States today is 0.05. And infant mortality there is 18%. So, and you look in the paper and you can see a lot of children die. So I guess it should come as no shock that there were children that were born around just before, during, and after the battle. And the term battle babies, you might think, where's he coming up with that term from? Well, it actually comes from the home of Jeremiah Culp. So Jeremiah and Rebecca Culp, and here's Jeremiah in the photograph, they lived at the time of the Civil War at 141 York Street. So on the south side of the second block of York Street. Let's see. Jeremiah Culp built a house in 1857, and at the time of the battle, Jeremiah and his wife Rebecca lived there with their 8 children. The youngest child, Myra Rebecca Culp, was just 15 months old at the time. At the time of her death in September 1957, Myra Culp was 95 years old. According to her obituary, she was one of the last survivors amongst those who were residents of Gettysburg at the time of the battle here. She often told how she, then but an infant, and her parents hid in the basement of her parents' home, 141 York Street, during the battle here. Keep that in mind, and I'll talk about Myra a little later. In February 1966, the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable started issuing Civil War building plaques to the buildings in town. And in February 1966, one of the first buildings in town to receive a plaque was the Jeremiah Culp House. And according to an article in the Gettysburg Times covering the ceremonies, you can see it's titled, "Local Home of Battle Baby to be Marked." And the article went on to relate that Jeremiah Culp resided and owned the house during the Civil War. It was his son, Jeremiah Meade Culp, who was born in the house July 4th, 1863, who became known as the Battle Baby, and was the first child to be named after the general commanding the Union troops at Gettysburg. So Jeremiah Culp, born on July 4th. I tend to believe, this is the house today, 141 York Street, I tend to believe that it was Colonel Jacob Sheeds that coined the term Battle Baby. I actually heard him use it one time, and in talking about Jeremiah Culp. And so I like to think, whether it was him or not, one of our licensed battlefield guides and local history teacher. Now, I should mention, here is Rebecca Culp, when she's a little bit older. Jeremiah Meade Culp. Unfortunately, he did not live long. He died on August 11th, 1863, just 5 weeks of age, and was buried in the Culp family plot in Gettysburg's Evergreen Cemetery, where, if you would like, today you could visit this grave of this little-known Battle Baby. Now, some of you might know that I did a YouTube video on this subject a couple months ago. And when I did that video, I looked at the Find a Grave site for Evergreen Cemetery, and this grave was not identified as Jeremiah Meade Culp. It wasn't known who it was. So I did this video. I pointed out the grave. I knew where he was. I knew he was buried there. I knew he had died. But you can't really read his birth date on the grave. And now, today, I wanted to get a photograph of the grave. I went to find a grave, and someone, Mrs. Hunt, Mr. Hunt, Hunt's French fries, Mrs. Hunt changed it and now has the dates of the Battle Baby on her site. So obviously, Mr. and Mr. Hunt are listening to our podcast, or they're watching our YouTube videos. So we should buy battlefield French fries at Mr. Hunt's in celebration of this fact. Love Mr. Hunt. Okay. Too many notes. Now, sure, Jeremiah, I should mention that Jeremiah Culp, the father, his first cousin, son of George Culp, on the left, is a Keller Culp that was captured at the Battle of Wilderness and died in Andersonville Prison. And of course, the Adams County Historical Society has that just awesome photograph of Keller Culp. And on the right, his other first cousin, another of his first cousins, is Wesley Culp. Of course, there's a lot of Culps in Gettysburg, you probably know. Now, the most famous of all the battle babies is, of course, Lewis Kenneth McClellan. And when he died in 1941, articles appeared in newspapers all over the country. And if you look at near the bottom on the left in the first column, he was referred to, it says, by historians, not just by regular people. He is referred to by historians as, quote, youngest veteran of the Battle of Gettysburg. And then, of course, on the left side, you see it talks about how he was born on Baltimore Street in the house in which his aunt, Jenny Wade, was killed. Throughout the three-day battle, McClellan, a 5-day-old infant, lay on a bed in the house with his mother, Georgia Wade McClellan, only sister of Virginia Wade. Now, this is the photograph on the left of Mary Virginia Wade. Her sister on the left, Georgia Wade, who, and another lady in the middle named Maria Comfort, and there's a picture of her husband, John Lewis McClellan, who was in the Army at the time of the battle. And she gave birth on June 26, 1863. Oh, by the way, that original daguerreotype is currently on display in the rotating exhibit at the Gettysburg Museum. So if you'd like to see that, you can actually see that original on display. Now, we're fortunate, of course, that there's a whole book about Jenny Wade published in 1917, and there's a picture taken in 1863 of Lewis Kenneth McClellan. It's interesting that I always wondered why he spells his name Lewis different than his father's name, Lewis. And in the book, it was Lewis, and this led to a little bit of confusion. Well, this is a original copy of the book when it was going into its second printing, which never was accomplished. And the handwritten notes in the book are those of Georgia Wade McClellan herself, and she corrects her son's name. And also put a note attached to a piece of paper in the book saying that my babe was born at 3:30 p.m., June 26, 1863. According to Michael Jacobs in his account of the battle, it was 3:15 when the Southern Army entered Chambersburg Street on June 26th. So she's given birth as the Southerners, whites, Comanches, are overrunning the town on that day, which I just find just fascinating. And of course, Juba Early entered the town and occupied the town that day on June 26th. And you might know that Georgia's little brother, Sam, was captured by the Southern Army, taking the horses of Tilly Pierce out Baltimore Street to try to get them away from the rebel captors. And Georgia's mom, and Jenny's mom, Mary Wade, had to leave her daughter, who had just given birth, to try to gain the release of her son in the town square, who had been captured by the Southern Army. So that's a pretty messed up moment there they must have had in that family. And of course, the house still stands. And of course, the house is famous because Jenny Wade was killed in the house on the morning of the third day of the battle. Now, I just thought you don't see Georgia much. So here's some pictures I've collected of Georgia, the girl who gave birth to a child on June 26, 1863. We have, of course, the blow up from the daguerreotype. And in the center is a photograph that appeared in a 1913 article about Jenny and Jack and Wesley that was published in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And then there's an 1897 photograph of Georgia Wade McClellan from the National Tribune newspaper. So if you haven't seen photographs of Georgia, this is your lucky day. So I think you can tell that, having a crooked smile is, one of her traits there. She likes her crooked smile. And so definitely her. And of course, when he's grown up, we have a picture of Kenneth Lewis McClellan, who moved west and died in Billings, Montana, where he is buried today. Let me look around. I'm guessing that only one person in this room has been to his grave. Who am I thinking of? Twice. Now, you've been there? She's been there. So when you find yourself in Billings, Montana, what are you guys going to do? Visit the grave of the youngest veteran of the Battle of Gettysburg. Of course, the problem with that is there are a couple younger kids. He's not the youngest veteran of the Battle of Gettysburg. Yes. So, do you guys know that David McConaughey, the lawyer who lives on Chambersburg Street and is acting as a scout under Darius Couch on June 26, gathering information about the whereabouts of the Southern Army, his wife, I think it's Lena Matthews McConaughey, his second wife, is giving birth to a child. On June 26, 1863, Samuel Griffin McConaughey is born on York Street in Gettysburg. And this fact has received very little attention over the years. This record is from his alumni record because when he graduated from Gettysburg College. But there's another June 26 baby. Yes. Let's see. Let me think. How can I describe it? I think it's Mama Ventura's that David McConaughey lives in. It's either Mama Ventura's or the building to the right of it, but I'm pretty sure it's Mama Ventura's. Okay. You can check me later, see if I still think I'm right. It's right about there. Now, also we have an interesting story. There's a girl named Laura Blueball. At the time of the Civil War, David Blueball was a proprietor of the Wagon Hotel that sat right up here in the intersection of the Baltimore Pike and the Emmitsburg Road. For many years, the Tavern was owned and operated by Conrad Snyder, who lived with his family just across the street next to the Jenny Wade, the McClellan house at the time. Conrad Snyder had died on June 6, 1860. And in March 1861, just a month prior to the outbreak of the Civil War, Conrad's daughter, Alice Jane Snyder, married David Blueball, who at some point took over the hotel, and he ran the hotel at the time of the battle. On July 1st, Union forces retreated through the town and up onto Cemetery Hill behind the hotel. Northern forces occupied the Wagon Hotel, and for the next 2 days, it was a fortress for Union sharpshooters firing into the edge of the town. And of course, Southerners from the Rupp Tannery and the Farnsworth House are firing back at the Union Hotel. The families along Cemetery Hill were ordered to vacate their homes, and the Blueballs were sent 5 miles down the pike, and they ended up at the home of Alice Jane's uncle, Henry Snyder, at 2 taverns. According to a reminiscence of the girl here, Amanda Epley Homan, who worked at the Wagon Hotel, quote, "While the battle raged, Mrs. Blueball gave birth to a daughter at the place of her refuge south of the town." And sure enough, the 1870 and the 1880 census indicate that David and, let's see, I said Mary Jane, didn't I? Now I have Agnes. I wonder which his wife is. That David Blueball and his wife had a daughter named Laura, who was born in 1863. The family moved to Abilene, Kansas after the war, where Laura died in the 1880s. I had not been able to confirm the date of her death exactly beyond date of birth, beyond the fact that she was born in 1863, until recently. I got on Find a Grave, and I got on it a few weeks ago, and again, I did a video about this girl for the YouTube, and now someone has gotten onto that Find a Grave site and put her date of birth as July 3rd, 1863. Now, should I look at this as further confirmation that she was born on July 3rd, her date of birth, I mean? Or did that person just watch my video and put that date in there, and I am my own source? These things bother me. So I'm still looking for good confirmation on that. But there is a, theoretical July 3rd baby. And there's the grave on Find a Grave. And the person who wrote this on Find a Grave noted that there are no dates on Laura Blueball's stone. We just know that she never married. She died somewhere between 17 and age 17, age 20. And there's a nice close-up of the Wagon Hotel that I colorized it. Maybe I shouldn't be colorizing some of these photos, but I did. And I wanted to point out that here we are on Baltimore Street, just as it turns. So we're standing sort of in front of the Hoof, Fin, and Fowl, and we're looking down towards the Farnsworth House with the Wagon Hotel, which sat near where the convenience store is there on the left, and the Conrad Snyder House, which stood on the right. And in the bushes just beyond it would be the McClellan House, or the house in which Jenny Wade was killed.
I'm sorry. Repeat that.
Okay. Did I go back? So the Conrad Snyder House sits in the parking lot for the hotel.
Okay, but is the Wade House...
And the Wade House is beyond it,
okay, so
where those trees are.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yes. So when you go up to the Jenny Wade House today, and just beyond it on the left, there's an empty parking lot. Yep. And just where the road turns, there was a house that sat there at the time of the battle. Yes, the Conrad Snyder House. And again, he had died, but his wife and family are living there.
Wait, time out. Tim, I'm sorry. The Snyder House is where the hotel, where the 1863 hotel.
The parking lot. The parking lot.
The parking lot.
The parking lot. On this side, yeah.
This side of the Wade House.
Yeah. Okay. That's why you can't see the Wade House. It's hidden.
Excuse me, south of the Wade House.
So
yeah. South of the Wade House.
It's south of the Wade House. So where would be the parking lot?
Just where the parking lot is. Yep. Okay. Just where you park in front of the Jenny Wade House. Okay. Good. Now, Jenny Meade Thompson. This is the widow Mary Thompson. Of course, she's famous because her house was used by Robert E. Lee as his headquarters during the battle. But her son, James Henry Thompson, and his family lived just across the street in a small house. And if you look at this little map, you can see the Thompson House and the Chambersburg Pike, and south of it, between the 149th Pennsylvania on the map and the 150th Pennsylvania, you see there's a square house. And this is a photograph of James Henry Thompson and Mary Jane Arndt Thompson. She's an Arndt of Arndtsville. And I got this photograph from the Thompson family when I wrote my book on the story of Lee's headquarters. And they had a family legend that there was a child born in this house before the battle. And I don't know, when they first told me this, how much stock I put into it. But James was in the Army. He was in the 165th Pennsylvania, drafted militia, was not here at the time. And like I said, according to family tradition, the mother, an infant, and another small child were huddled in the cellar during the first day's fighting. And, they always said the child had just been born. Let's see. The child did not live long. She died on March 8th, 1864, 8 months and 9 days of age. There's a burial permit at Evergreen Cemetery, and on it, it gives her exact age as 8 months, 9 days, which confirms that she was born on June 30th, 1863. And there's a baptismal record for this child in the St. James Lutheran Church records. And both the burial permit and the church records give her name as Jane Meade Thompson. So not only is she born on June 30th, she's also named after General Meade. Now, Mary Jane Arndt Thompson on the left there, she died in 1870. And today, she is buried in an unmarked grave in Evergreen Cemetery along with her daughter, Jane. James Henry Thompson moved to Illinois and eventually remarried. But the story of this battle baby had been handed down through the Thompson family. And, I don't doubt that there might be other battle babies that I just don't know about that are close into the town. So maybe one day there'll be another story like that at first I don't believe. Why shouldn't we believe these people when they tell the stories, right? So one of my favorite battle babies of all time is in the town of Fairfield. So on July 4th, the Confederate Army began its retreat from Gettysburg and over the mountains into the Cumberland Valley and back to Virginia. A large portion of the Southern Army retreated through the village of Fairfield. On the afternoon of July 5th, the advance of the 6th Army Corps under John Sedgwick caught up with the rear guard of the Southern Army just east of the town. After a brief skirmish, Sedgwick's men occupied a range of hills and began to shell the retreating Confederates in the town. Some of the shells dropping in and around the town itself. This is the home of Abraham Hill McCreary, 14 East Main Street, Fairfield. McCreary had actually been a captain in a local cavalry unit in 1861 and 1862. He was a business partner with, I didn't put his business partner's name, but he had a business in town that was ransacked by Jeb Stuart in 1862 during a raid through Fairfield. But at the time of the battle, Abraham's wife, Martha, was 9 months pregnant. According to family legend, the shelling caused Martha to go into labor, and a child was born while the family sought shelter in the house, in the cellar. Confirming this story is a 1907 reminiscence given by Sarah Horner, a relative of the McCrearys, who wrote, "In the cellar of one of the families, a babe was born, to whom was given the name Sedgwick. William Sedgwick McCreary, in honor of the Union general who was shelling the town while he's born." That's crazy. William Sedgwick McCreary lived until 1917. I do not have a photograph of him. I've been pestering the McCrearys I know to try to get me a photograph, or somebody in Fairfield. But he lived until 1917. But his obituary and his grave both indicate that he was born on July 4th, 1863, and not July 5th, 1863, which upsets my story just a little bit.
So where's that grave?
It's Fairfield Union Cemetery. Not too far from the front of the cemetery as you ride by on the road to Emmitsburg, if you want to check that out. But that is cool. Named after, how many How many babies are named after General Sedgwick? I love it. There's other children born in the area on July 4th. Jessie Cora Zinn was born on July 4th, and family genealogy says she was born in Gettysburg, but I'm not sure about that. The best I figure, the family lives in Idaville, which is not Gettysburg. There's a Clara Rosanna Hoffman born on July 6th in Butler Township. I don't know exactly where they lived, but somewhere just up the road here on July 6th. Josephine Cecilia Staub was born on July 8th. And she's the daughter of John Staub and Catherine Kadori Staub. And you know, the Kadori family maintains that she's born in the Kadori house. I kind of think that since her husband, John Staub's in the Army, that she's probably born on Middle Street at the site of Kenny's Market on July 8th. But still, that she's definitely born on July 8th. And there's a boy, John Edward Cashman, born near Cashtown on July 8th, I believe. Okay. So that's the battle babies that I have for you. Now, who's this? This is in Evergreen Cemetery. This is Jessie Zinn, who's the wife of Reverend Lore, and you can see clearly on the grave, born July 4th, 1863. And again, genealogists say she's born in the town. But if the family lived in the town at the time of the battle, they're renters and I can't find them. And in the 1860 census, they're clearly living in Idaville. So I'm not counting her at the moment. Idaville's a little bit too far away. Now, switching gears slightly, I have 3 different broad topics here. I want to talk about Gettysburg's last surviving witnesses of the battle. Of course, we all know that the last surviving veteran of the American Civil War is Albert Wilson, who lived until August 1956. And, you know, he was 106 when he died. I used to say he was 109, but there's been some pretty good documentation now that he was only 106 and not 109. I got the age 109 from the Rosenstiel Museum that used to be up here on top of Cemetery Hill. When you went in, they had a picture of Albert Wilson given his date of birth and his date of death. So apparently he's only 106. But, you know, Albert Wilson, who has a statue on Cemetery Ridge, was not at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was in the 2nd Minnesota Infantry, I believe. The last survivor of the Army of the Potomac, you might know, is a guy named James Marion Lurvey, a medical attendant attached to a field hospital here. And he was 15 years old at the time. He never fired a shot. He was not a combat veteran, but he died on September 17th, 1950, at age 103. And so he's the last person in the battle in a uniform that survived. I do not know the last surviving soldier that was in the Battle of Gettysburg. Wayne, do you remember there was a guy named like James Hard, like in the 147th? Do you remember what unit the guy was in?
I think it's one of Cutler's. It's
one of Cutler's guys, yeah. This guy, I think this guy died in the 1940s, and I think this guy was probably the last survivor. But we don't. No one's done that research that I know of to figure that out. So if the listeners on the podcast are interested in that, they can, you know, research some of this. You know, the people on the podcast, though, they can't see the wonderful photographs that I am showing to all the huge crowd here tonight. Okay. So anyway, I suspect that the last surviving witness of the battle, it's not a tree. Trees can't see things. I don't know if these witness people know that, witness tree people. But it's probably a civilian. So let's talk about some of the last surviving civilians. Oh, go to the next one. Oh, I wanted to show you. Here's Flores Church Cemetery. And for whatever reason, probably because it's one of the oldest German cemeteries in our area. Some Scotch-Irish. But for the western part of the county, it's an old cemetery, and there's a lot of people buried here who would have been around at the time of the battle. So here I even have a picture of this one. Maria Jane Mickley Henry. She was the daughter of Jacob Mickley and Annie Arndt, another Arndt of Arntsville. She was one of 12 children born into the family. Her father, Jacob Mickley, was one of 14 children. So you can find relatives of the Mickleys around here today. I think Randy File, for instance, is a descendant of the Mickleys. The Mickleys are one of the most prominent families in the western part of the county, and they descend from an American Revolutionary War soldier who moved into Adams County following the war for American independence. Oh, it should also be noted that I should mention that she has a younger, Maria Jane has a younger sister born after the battle named Ella Meade Mickley. I'm not sure exactly where the family lived because there's Mickleys all over the place near Flores Church and Cashtown. Her grandmother, though, lived in a house across the road from Flores Church, and she fed rebels during the campaign and was compensated by Confederate money. And that particular currency we'll have on display at our new Adams County Historical Society Museum beyond the battle when it opens, next year. I had to throw that in there. Commercial. According to her obituary, Maria was a lifelong resident of Adams County, died on April 22nd, 1951 at the age of 89, and was buried in Flores Church Cemetery. And you can visit her grave there today. Mary Alice Walter Naus, daughter of Jacob Walter and Lucinda Stover, was born in Hamilton Bond Township on February 24th, 1862. According to her obituary, she is a lifelong resident of Adams County, and she died in 1952 at the age of 90 and is buried in Flores Church. Emma Jane Swartz, daughter of Moses Swartz and Mary Eliza Dutera, was born in Littlestown in 1859. When she was 3 years old, the family moved to Cashtown, a short distance from Flores Church. According to her obituary, she often said she remembered the Battle of Gettysburg. There it is in her obituary. She was 3. She never married, and she died in Cumberland Township on January 21st, 1953 at the age of 93. So when she was 93, she can remember being 3 years old and the Confederates passing her house. John Adam Walter, the son of Charles Walter and Susan Knoll, was born near Otana on July 8th, 1859, so he would have been almost 4 at the time. According to his obituary, he was a lifelong resident of Ortana. So he would have been present during the battle along Tract Road fought there that today we call the Battle of Fairfield. He died at Annie Warner Hospital in Gettysburg in 1954 at the age of 94. And again, he's buried at Flores Church. And 2 more. John Upton Cook, son of John Cook and Matilda Martha Lawver, was born near Cashtown, Franklin Township, on September 20th, 1860. According to his obituary, John was a child of almost 3 when the cavalry troops fought in his native cash town. Lee's men marched past his door en route to Gettysburg and on the retreat from it. So again, right there in his obituary. He died in 1958 at age 97. William Henry Collison was born in 1862. So he was like, I'm sorry, 18.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I have 62 here. It's 52, isn't it?
62.
Okay. He lived all his life near Hilltown, Franklin Township. And he would have been there when Juba Early's force passed through Hilltown on June 26, 1863. And he died in 1959 at the age of 96. So you get a lot of people at Flores Church if you walk around. And that brings us to Gettysburg on that same topic. Let's stop right there for a moment. Let's see. Libby, let me see if I'm good on time. Good. Libby put out our raffle tickets, and I'm sure she has gift certificates here.
Tim, one question.
Sure.
These phenomenal ages that these people lived to in the 90s, I mean, obviously that's an exception.
No. I think that all my life researching cemeteries and going around the cemeteries, people live the same age then as we do now. Maybe a little more. The thing is that when we talk about ages, there's a lot greater chance of you dying a lot younger back then. But once you make it to a certain point, you got the chance to make it to 100 just the way we got the chance to make it to 100. Yeah. Is that what your impression is, Wayne? There's lots of people who live to 100 at a time.
Can you get past 10? If you get past 10, then you've got a better chance. But the average is brought down because of the child. You just said it's 18 and a half times what it is today. Think about that. And that's what the issue is. And then you look at what people die of, which can be cured by antibiotics. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest killers that you see, and a lot of people you don't hear about it, and that's Bright's disease, kidney disease. You don't have dialysis for anything. You get diabetes, things like that. This stuff can't be taken care of. So it just depends. If you've got good genes, you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Okay, so here's our raffle tickets. Let's see. Our first ticket is last 3 numbers, 652. Good. Very good. Okay, let me start back up again. So everybody take your seats. Let's see. Also, I came back to Baltimore Street and Jenny Wade's house. You probably know that Georgia Wade McClellan rented half of the duplex. Like on the north side is the McClellan rental unit, and on the south side of the house, actually it was John Houck, who lived up here on Baltimore Street near the Presbyterian Church, that actually owned the property. John Houck also owned Devil's Den at the time of the battle. But in the south side of the McClellan house, or that's what we refer to it as, the Houck rental unit, was Catherine McLean. And her husband, Isaac, was actually in the Army at the time of the battle. And she had a child, Susan Teresa McLean, who was born in March of 1861. I don't have the exact date. So she was 2 years old at the time. And she died in Baltimore, Maryland on June 26, 1953, at 92. She's buried there in New Cathedral Cemetery. My great-grandfather is buried in that cemetery. I have not been to see her grave, though, which I think I plan on next time I get down there, I'll try to find it. The people in the office there are big Gettysburg fans, so when I go in there, they really treat me well. They'll get it for me. But when she died in 1953, it was her niece that donated her clock to the Jenny Wade House Museum. And that's the clock today that sits on the McLean side of the house when you come downstairs. So it was given to the museum, and it said that she had that from her mother, and that clock actually sat on the mantle in that kitchen at the time of the battle. In 1952, a year prior to her death, Susan visited the Jenny Wade house and related her story. And she told of being in the cellar during the battle with the Wade family. And this is the only reference we have that it makes sense that when Jenny Wade's body and the rest of the family came over and stayed in the cellar, the McLean family are also with them in the cellar. And in her obituary, it is noted that, quote, as a child, she had lived in half of the Jenny Wade house during the Battle of Gettysburg and was the only living person who witnessed the death of the only civilian to die during the battle. So she was 2, but she witnessed the death of Jenny Wade. I can see that some of these things you're going to, you're going to question how these people remember stuff. So, and I wanted to point out again, the photograph we showed earlier, the Wagon Hotel that was run by Conrad Snyder and the Conrad Snyder house. And of course, the next person I have here, oh, there she is, Rosa Snyder Gettle. Rosa Snyder is born in 1859, the daughter of Conrad and Catherine Snyder. So in 1863, she was 4 years old. Rosa died in 1954 at age 95 in Wymore, Nebraska. And she's buried there in Table Rock Cemetery in Pawnee County, Nebraska. We're fortunate that Rosa was interviewed several times concerning her memories of the battle and gave a detailed account of her family and her family's experience in 1944 when she was 85, 10 years earlier. Her reminiscence are part of the collection in the Adams County Historical Society. And she gave details about Jenny Wade's death and details about Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And remember, she's 4. And she's quoted as saying this: "The happenings of those days, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, were so strongly impressed on the 4-year-old child's mind that even the smallest details are remembered today. It is as vivid as an event of yesterday. I can remember it all so clearly." There you go. Just like Rose on the Titanic. Yes. In 1944, in her interview, it was stated, "As far as is known, Mrs. Gettle is the only living inhabitant of Gettysburg who was there at the time of the battle." Not so. We have other ones. So here is a house on West Middle Street, 64 West Middle Street. So this is on the south side of West Middle Street in the first block, before you get to Washington Street, down past the courthouse. And it was here that Carolyn Louise Ziegler was born on November 29th, 1859, the daughter of Waybright Ziegler and Elizabeth Martin. The couple had completed construction on this 3-story brick house on West Middle Street earlier that year. The building still stands. Waybright died in 1861, but there's every indication to believe that his widow and children were still living there at the time of the battle. Carolyn died in Baltimore, Maryland on February 22nd, 1955 at age 96 and is buried in Evergreen Cemetery. So there's a girl, a Ziegler. Carolyn Louise Ziegler Stein is her married name. Lived until 1955. Here's Emra Daniel Balker. Emra. E-M-R-A. Emra. He was known as Ed, or E.D. Balker. I guess if your name's Emra, you probably want to go with Ed. He was born in 1855 in East Berlin. So he's 8 years old at the time of the battle. Hey, he could probably remember. In several articles surrounding his 100th birthday, he described a Confederate invasion and the sound of artillery emanating from cannon fire 15 miles away. He died at age 101 in Kinsley, Kansas on April 20th, 1956. And he today is buried in East Berlin. Should we count somebody who's buried in East Berlin as being one of the last surviving veterans? But here she is. This is my candidate, Myra Rebecca Culp, who we discussed near the beginning of the program. She was born on March 13th, 1862, and is 15 months old at the time of the battle. She was the daughter of Jeremiah and Rebecca Culp, and was a brother of Jeremiah Meade Culp, the battle baby. At the time of her death, on September 22nd, 1957, Myra was 95 years old. According to her obituary, she was, quote, one of the last survivors among those who were residents of Gettysburg at the time of the battle here, and often told how she, then but an infant, and her parents hid in the cellar of her parents' home. Yeah. So I don't want to point any fingers. Some of us were probably alive before she died. Have you thought about the fact that you might have been alive while someone who was at the Battle of Gettysburg was alive? Now, don't worry. I'm going to get us a little closer. But this is the last survivor that I could find that is in the town of Gettysburg during the heavy fighting. So she's on York Street in a cellar during the battle, and she lived until 1957. And we have a photograph of her in later life. Now, we actually mentioned, remember earlier, that near John Upton Cook, near Cashtown, lived until January 58, and William Henry Cullison lived near Hilltown, and he lived until 1959. There's an Alice Bittinger Doherty, the daughter of George Bittinger and Belle Christ, and she was 7 months old at the time of the battle, and she died in 1958 at age 95 and is buried in Greenmount Cemetery in Orangeville. Let's see what the next one is. Oh, that's not yet. There's a George F. Doherty, born on May 30th, 1863. And he's the son of David Doherty and Eliza Jane Herbst of the Herbst farm. And David was working as a laborer on John Herbst farm in the 1860 census. The 1863 draft list shows David in Highland Township, which is not far away, just west of here. But their child, George F. Doherty, died on March 9th, 1858 at age 94 and is buried in Evergreen Cemetery. So he was like a month old at the time of the battle. Jacob Bittinger Bayshore, son of Jacob Bayshore and Lydia Bittinger, was born in Littlestown in 1862. So he was 15 months old during the battle. He died on July 6, 1958, and is buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Littlestown. Rosella H. Sadler Griffin, daughter of Samuel Sadler and Nancy Lease, was born in Tyrone Township on March 4th, 1863. Her father was a tavern keeper in Heidlersburg at the time of the Civil War and also owned a farm. Robert Rhodes' division camped on their farm on June 30th, 1863, the night before the battle. According to a claim file by Samuel Sadler, the Southerners destroyed 600 of his fence rails. What do you think happened to the fence rails that night? Yeah, so we know that they were camped on his farm. And although Rosella is only 4 months old at the time, she would have been present and possibly had direct contact with the soldiers in the battle. She died in New Oxford on November 20th, 1962. And she's buried in the cemetery in New Oxford. So 1962. So again, you're crossing paths here. Yeah, I'm looking at you guys right there.
Yeah, right. You're right here, yeah.
And then we have, of course, we can all appreciate this one. Mary E. Trossel Lau. She's the daughter of Peter Trossel and Sarah was Lau. She married a Lau. Sarah Ann Bollinger, and she was born on January 9th, 1863. So she's about 6 months old at the time of the battle. She died on May 21st, 1969 at age 106, and she's buried in East Berlin. But technically, she lived in Paradise Township at the time of the battle. But Juba Early marched by her house on his way, to York. So there you go, 1969. Wouldn't you have loved to talk to her? So there you have it for the last surviving. But I'm going to give the last surviving veteran of the battle to Myra Culp. Now, there's another thing I wanted to talk about, the last of my topics. And this is, I like to call Gettysburg's Gettysburg namesakes. So, the purpose here is people that are born after the battle or during the Civil War and named after people that, were prominent in the battle. Now, I should mention that we have lots of Gettysburg namesakes for famous people. Do you know how many Thaddeus Stevens we have in our area? And I will not go over their birth dates and death dates with you here. But just off the top of my head, I made a list. Thaddeus Stevens Blocker, Thaddeus Stevens Camp, Thaddeus Stevens Clarkson, Thaddeus Stevens Davis, Thaddeus Stevens Fleming, Thaddeus Stevens Gillian, Thaddeus Stevens Mark, Thaddeus Stevens Peffer, Thaddeus Stevens Slentz, Thaddeus Stevens Stoltz, Thaddeus Stevens Weibel, Thaddeus Stevens Welty, and Thaddeus Stevens Warren, a member of Company E, 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry. So, and do you know that Jenny Wade's sister, Georgia, gave birth to a child in 1865, the next child after Kenneth Lewis McClellan, and she's named Jenny Wade McClellan, born in August 1865. So there's a Jenny Wade namesake. And like any town, we're going to have Abraham Lincolns. Abraham Lincoln Autlin was born near East Berlin on June 1st, 1860. That's interesting. because that's Lincoln. Now, you know, when you're named is not when you're born. You're named when you're baptized. So Abraham Lincoln had been nominated for the Republican presidential candidate just 2 weeks earlier. This is during the election campaign they gave him that name. Abraham Lincoln Jacobs is born in Abbottstown on February 22nd, 1865. Records of St. James Lutheran Church indicated that George Lincoln Strickhauser, son of George and Suzanne Strickhauser, was born in Gettysburg on April 6th, 1865. Isn't that interesting? So he's probably baptized, given that name, at the time he was baptized after Lincoln's assassinated. Moses Abraham Lincoln Trossel is born on April 14th, 1865, the same day that President Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. And he died in 1945 and is buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Littlestown. William Lincoln Scott, Ruth Lincoln Walter, Abraham Lincoln Earnshaw, Harry Lincoln Pitzer. Let's see. And then, of course, we got to have some people named after George Brenton McClellan, don't you think? Should I have one of those here? I think I have one. There you go. We got George Brenton McClellan Booker, son of Adam and Susanna Booker, born on June 8th, 1863, while his father was stationed in Suffolk, Virginia, as part of the 165th Pennsylvania Drafted Militia. And he's buried in Flores Church Cemetery there. And then, oh, I'm sorry, that was the one before that. This is George Brenton McClellan Sterner, who was born on October 6, 1864, during the height of the 1864 presidential campaign. So this is like a month before Election Day. I wonder who his father voted for. His father is David Sterner, who owns the iron furnace factory on Franklin Street and Chambersburg Street at the time of the battle. And also we have some of his stoves in the collection of the Adams County Historical Society. He also built one of the stoves that Josephine Miller is using in that photograph when she's baking bread for the soldiers on the battlefield in the 1880s. And if you're wondering, yes, George Brenton McClellan carried Adams County in 1864, not Abraham Lincoln. Although it was really close. We have Ulysses S. Grant's John Grant Rupp. Do you remember that? John Grant Rupp, named after Grant, is just up here. Anna Grant Spangler, George Grant Earnshaw, Charles Grant Herbst, Nellie Grant Broadhead. Sarah Broadhead had a child born in 1864 with the middle name Grant. How about William Washington Grant Meals? He was born on February 22nd, 1865, on George Washington's birthday. And his father, William B. Meals of York Street, was serving in 184th Pennsylvania near Petersburg under Grant's command. Isn't that cool? William Washington Grant Meals. We got some John Fulton Reynolds. Do you know that Reynolds, after he was killed, his body was taken to the home of George up here on the Emmitsburg Road near, right near Gettysburg Eddies. And in 1865, George's wife Susanna George gave birth to a child, and they named the child Charles Reynolds George, undoubtedly named after the general whose body was taken to their house. And of course, Myra Culp has a younger brother named Harvey Reynolds Culp. And the family history specifically mentions that he's named after General Reynolds. And then you might be familiar with Strong Vincent Bushman, the son of Louis Adolphus Bushman and Carolyn Miller Little. He was born on September 29, 1863. And for many years, he owned a store on the Tonytown Road at the base of Little Round Top. He died in Hanover, Pennsylvania in 1937 and is buried in Evergreen Cemetery. According to his obituary, Mr. Bushman was named for General Strong Vincent, who was wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg. General Vincent was taken to the Bushman home after being wounded. When relatives claimed the body of General Vincent, they heard of the birth of a son in the Bushman home and requested that the baby be named after the deceased general. That's in his obituary. Isn't that good? Strong Vincent Bushman. Oh, and Deb Novotny was here last night. If you weren't here, you didn't see Deb Novotny. Deb Novotny's here. And she had Strong Vincent Bushman's granddaughter on a tour of the battlefield. Strong Vincent Bushman. That is a cool name. Okay. Now, being the commander, let's see, where are we at? Being the commander of the victorious Army of the Potomac, it should come as no surprise that during the days and months that followed the battle, more children were named in honor of George Meade than any other soldier on the field. So again, I'm not going to read all the dates, but I have all the dates if you want to check any of my research here. Jeremiah Meade Culp was born on July 4th, 1863. Jenny Meade Thompson was born on June 30th, 1863. But we have other ones. Lorena Meade Tipton, the little sister of William H. Tipton, the photographer. Alice Meade Hake. Charles Meade Epley. Franklin Meade Garlick. Anna Garlick's little brother. Mia Meade Comfort, who was just born up on Baltimore Street. Clara Meade Weichert. George Albert Meade Sell. Alice Meade Hake. A lot of females with the middle name General Meade. Adam Meade Rebert. Annie Meade Davis. George Meade Patterson. Ambrose Meade Taylor. Gordon Meade Fissel. I thought I was done. William Meade Henry. George Franklin Meade Yates. And finally, and these are all born within, a couple years of the battle while the Civil War is still going on. Rosa Meade Thorne. And there's probably the best view you're ever going to see of the side of the grave, which clearly indicates her middle name. And of course, she's the daughter of Peter and Elizabeth Thorne, born on November 1st, 1863. And of course, it's Rosa that Elizabeth Thorne is pregnant with while she's digging graves of the soldiers in July of 1863. Rosa died in 1878 at age 14 and is buried in Evergreen Cemetery, clearly indicating her middle name, General Meade. So, while it appears that popular historians are hesitant to give General Meade the proper credit for his stunning victory over Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg, local residents who were here during the battle and witnessed what occurred had no problem naming their children after the greatest general in all of American history. I had to come up with a flashy ending there. Okay, well, thanks for listening to my battle babies. Okay, and I even finished on time this time. Okay, yeah. So next week I have a program, I actually already have it done, called Debris of Battle. And basically the program is about the aftermath of the battle and the stuff that's laying around the ground after the battle and how the local residents are going to pick up that stuff and make things out of it so they can sell to tourists. Yeah, and people are still buying that stuff that was picked up off the battlefield and made into items to be sold for tourists. Actually, it's more the subject's actually a little more broad than that, but I just thought I'd throw that in there for you. But it's called Debris of Battle. Okay.